Welcome to the podcast, which is all about the world of direct response. Are we on the air? I'm your host, Shawn Wilsie, and for over 30 years I've hosted shows on cable shopping networks, and now I want to be your guide into this world as we look at the ever-changing nature of the industries. On the heels of my last two-parter there with Steve Siddall, as we were doing the show, I had the concept for what is now going to be this episode. And it's going to be a little bit different, but I think you'll still find it very interesting because as I was talking to Steve, we started discussing names and we started discussing TV shows he'd been on. I'm thinking about all the connections that the world of television shopping and really successful broadcasting in general has with the state of Minnesota and Minneapolis-St. Paul in particular. And it just started dawning on me how many of the hosts, legendary hosts in this industry, have been born from a background from Minnesota. Rick Domeyer from QVC. He's been there 30 years now. Born in New Ulm, Minnesota. Mary Beth, who just retired from QVC after a legendary career from Long Prairie, Minnesota. Dan Wheeler was a legendary host at QVC. He was at Cable Value Network for a long time. He's actually from Michigan, and the same kind of thing. It's the same kind of, I think, work mentality, and just there's something about those regions. Allie, I think she's a QVC host. Used to be a Shop HQ. I'm pretty sure she was born in Minnesota, but maybe not. Rachel, one of the hosts of QVC, is from Minnesota. Shannon Smith, who was at HSN forever, from Minnesota. Colleen Lopez still makes appearances from time to time on HSN from Minnesota. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so from a state that I think is 22nd in population for the country, a lot of great talent has come out of that state. Legendary broadcasters like Johnny Olson, who was the announcer on The Price is Right forever. He was born in the state of Minnesota. And I've always thought in fact, I think it was one of my professors once that pointed out that, and obviously Minneapolis, yours truly, one of my professors pointed out that to be a successful broadcaster, you have to have a neutral voice. Now, I think that rule has changed a little bit over the years, and there are some people on television with very pronounced accents, but still not to the degree that, you're going to see a national news anchor with a very strong, accent like they're from Alabama. That's probably not going to happen. And I think, because it's a stereotype, the Fargo accent. Does it exist up there to a point? Yes. But, movies like Fargo so exaggerated. I think there is a neutrality to that voice. And again, this is what our professor was talking about, that it kind of lends itself towards sounding professional and being professional. Tom Oszman is the go-to expert in this area. And if you are in the Twin Cities or in the state of Minnesota, you probably have heard him or seen him on television. He's an archivist of anything and everything relating to Twin Cities media. And I'll let him mention his website and his YouTube in just a moment or two. And so I thought, if I want to discuss what makes a successful broadcaster, especially from that region, this is the guy, because he digs into archives of locally produced news, talk shows, game shows, all those kind of things. And yes, by the way, just on the list of television that has come out of the Twin Cities, there was a game show, Mall Masters at Mall of America, that was produced there. Mall Cops, a reality show where they followed the mall cops. One of my favorite shows as a kid, Newton's Apple, was produced by the public television station up there. So not just personalities, a lot of nationally broadcast, obviously Mystery Science Theater, Let's Bowl that we discussed on the last show, has all come from there. But anyway, I thought if I want to discuss this with any credibility, that this is the gentleman to get on the podcast. Anyway, so I want to get Tom into the conversation here so we can pursue this even further, because so many greats have come out of the state of Minnesota. Tom, first of all, explain to the listeners, because we have some people literally around the world that listen to this thing for whatever reason. How did you get started archiving media from the Twin Cities?
Sure. Well, hi, Sean. Well, it started with having a lot of media at home. And then there came a point in the 90s and 2000s where people were just throwing away all their videotapes. And I found these as little time capsules they're throwing away. And it's a tape could be 6 hours of someone's life. What were they interested in? What were they watching? What did they want to watch again? And the great thing of VCRs back in the 80s and 90s is if you didn't know how to hit the stop button, well, now you have 6 hours of unexpected material. You have 3 hours of late night movies with commercials, which are gold for what I do for when I do my website. So that became, I was showing people videos. I was creating, you call them playlists. I was creating these clips at home. And then people were, this is pre-YouTube. So I would be showing people DVDs and things I had made. Back in these days, of course, we were swapping commercials and programs, and there'd be people on the internet that you'd throw your list to back and forth. This is all, pre watching things on our devices. And then it just took off from there. So people were giving me things. I was working with people that were in the industry. With my background on media, it kind of grew. So yeah, it became a library of media, which is what I'm still working through every day. I'm finding something and posting things.
I had to laugh when you said, you start recording something and the VCR keeps going. I can't tell you how much of the television shopping and infomercial clips that I've posted on YouTube are from that very thing. It's like I was recording Carson or something, and then all of a sudden, I've got Alex Trebek in his short venture as a TV shopping host. So it is wild what people can find, and that's why Tom is such an expert in the field of Twin Cities media. And when I was doing my last show with Steve Siddall from Cable Value Network, as I'm interviewing him, I'm thinking, my gosh, so many great talent has come out of the Twin Cities and the state of Minnesota. I think the state of Minnesota is like 22nd for population nationally,
Yep.
but the amount of talent that has come out of that state is so amazing. And the first one, I'm going to go down a little list of names in a little bit, but since the topic of my show is the world of infomercials and TV shopping, the first name that comes to mind immediately is Nancy Nelson, because so many people know her from the Ron Popeil infomercials. Let everybody else know about the other side of Nancy Nelson that they may not know about.
Well, that's a first of all, I think that's great because Nancy was a Miss Minnesota in the 1960s. She was the word pioneer is thrown way too often. I'm not giving
Amen.
Nancy, but she was a young lady who was very telegenic. TV was still a bit of its infancy in the 60s. Now it wasn't 1949, obviously, but there was always looking for programming. So she was on Dancing with Dino, which was a local show, and then she was the weather girl on Channel 4. She eventually got her own talk show in Minneapolis, called What's New, which was kind of like an almost a precursor to the Popeil programs because there's always there was cooking, there was animals, there was guests. It was, I think, a 2 hour show at first. And what people don't remember about What's New is it was on for 11 years. It was on
Wow.
almost as long as Good Company or other shows which everyone remembers more. I think What's New was it was before the VCR era. It was on daytimes. A lot of kids were at school, so it's not as remembered as much as Good Company was. But Nancy did that show for 11 years. 11 years of TV. That's like, that's 50 years in any other job. So
Yeah, very true.
and by the way, it's live TV. It's being upbeat, bubbly, improv comedy, reacting to the host. So I think that was great training for Nancy. And Nancy then went to LA. I think that Nancy was a great pick for a lot of those infomercials you see because she knew her way around some products and with a host and be able to react and be able to be spontaneous, but spontaneous where it isn't too goofy. I'm actually talking to you today from the Minnesota Broadcasting Hall of Fame, just over not too far from where I'm sitting right now. And Nancy's plaque is there, and I was looking at it just a little while ago.
Oh, so well deserved too. Yeah, because if you heard what Tom just said, because it surprises a lot of people, because people from LA are going to recognize her and say, "Hey, she was our anchor woman for so many years," but yet she was actually living in Minneapolis still, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was a commuter. So she would do her husband was a Bill Carlson was a entertainment and news anchor locally. So they'd be they would be commuting. So the nice thing was they were both doing entertainment reports, so they both got to do LA, and then she'd come here. She'd be hosting a Grand Day parade on Saturday, and she'd be anchoring the news on Monday. So
Wow.
they were tethered to two cities, which was great for all of us because they had a lot of connections and able to share notes. And I have a lot of tapes that both Nancy and Bill were interviewing the same people side by side, and that was fantastic. And you get to meet people and know people, and that's a power couple right there.
I'm going to put you on the spot because I have tried. The next name is not going to be well known nationally, but very well known to a couple generations of people in the state of Minnesota. I have tried to explain to people the greatness of Mel Jazz, and it's just, I've failed to do it. Pick
You
it
know
up
the
then
problem.
and run with it.
Yeah, here's the problem with Mel Jazz. Okay, and it's not his problem; it's ours. Is Mel Jazz's peak popularity was before anyone had a recorder to record it,
Good
and
point.
everyone who saw Mel Jazz loves Mel Jazz, and everyone talks about Mel Jazz. People who are movie aficionados, um, in Minnesota, and I see people all the time who ask me about Mel Jazz because they look at my website. Why don't you have Mel Jazz on there? Well, Mel Jazz was also at Channel 11, same place Nancy was, and they were doing live TV. He would be doing the Mel's Matinee.
Right.
So they'd play old movies. Mel would do cut-ins. He would do some comedy. He would do some commercials. It was all record. It was all live. So even 11 has very little historical broadcast. You wouldn't. It is something you ever would have thought of recording. Um, and by the time that even the Betamaxes or VCRs came into play, unfortunately, he was not doing those anymore. So, but Mel Jazz, I mean, he just knew a way how to talk to the camera and talk to you and make you laugh. And he'd be laughing at himself, and he was just a character. And Google Mel Jazz, and you
Yep.
see a few clips, and you see a few there's some outtakes I did find, and they're mostly PG. They're good, but movie people, movie men and women remember watching old movies and classics with Mel Jazz.
Every afternoon if I was home from school sick or during the summer, it was almost must-see TV. And I think that's where I developed an appreciation for, as you said, he spoke to you. He looked at the
Mhm.
camera and spoke to you. And that's what I think made him, it's so sad there's no video because it made him one of the greatest product pitchmen ever. He's up there with the all-time greats because when he sold something, you could feel the passion that he had for that. But he might have hated the product for all I know. Who knows? But he sold it with such a passion. He was looking right at you. He is one of the all-time best. If anyone listening to this has any video, and I'll tell you later on how to get video to Tom if you do, please get it to him of Mel Jazz because he deserves the national attention that he's long been due. You mentioned in passing, because again, when we talk about greats of Twin Cities media, you mentioned the TV show Good Company.
Yeah.
And that is definitely up there. I think to this day, it's still one of the longest running local talk shows. And it's not, I don't want to compare it to anything on TV today, because most of the morning local shows today, there's a lot of paid segments. I was just
Yeah.
watching Great Day SA out of San Antonio this morning. And it's like they had 3 segments in a row. This segment is sponsored by blah, 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 sponsored by blah, blah, blah. This was an honest to goodness, sit down talk show.
Stephen Sharon started as your typical morning. There was a show called Twin Cities Today, and it was Today's show, except local, and they would have a few topics on with the studio audience. It was a precursor to a lot of the talk shows you would have saw in national syndication years later, but it was all variety, a little bit of news and weather, and they were not together. They were chosen randomly to be together, and they became together. And all of a sudden, they were married. They went to I think Washington to do a national show that came back up years later. And Good Company, the concept sounds simple enough, but it was a large staff. They would do field reports. They would be doing Gary Lumpkin did stunts or he did the rodeo. They'd have your typical Hollywood people in, but they also had people from the Guthrie. They had people locally. They had musicians. They did some of them I call them the heart wrenching pieces that Mike Brunswick did. It was a well produced hour of TV. The challenge Good Company had, though, to your point, was it was an era before pay for play. So when the syndication gluttony of talk shows came out in the 90s, it was a uncompetitive disadvantage that Good Company had, that if you're trying to make money in TV and all of a sudden now we have 100 channels, not 5 channels when Good Company came out, satellites are coming in. There's just was it was tough to make a competitive product profitably. And what I'll give Good Company credit is they didn't decline their quality. I have many shows of Good Company on the website, and it's not like they went to a they didn't do scandal shows. They didn't go to, let's say, Ricky Lake, or even way of doing their talk show. In fact, a lot of Good Company people end up going working to Oprah, on other great shows. A lot of comedians came to Good Company that had their start off at Minneapolis Comedy Club. So it was just a real quality show. And everyone remembers it. And a lot of people come to me and said, "Hey, I was on Good Company. I did a fashion show on sometime. Do you have it?" And I say, "Probably not yet, but I'm always looking."
Again, the connection to the world of television shopping is one of the legendary Home Shopping Network hosts, Colleen Lopez, was a frequent contributor to Good Company for a while.
And by the way, she won a, if I remember correctly, she was a host for a day contest winner.
Oh, they did have a yearly, I think it was, contest where a
And
viewer.
she was one of the first contest winners.
Oh, my goodness gracious. That does ring a bell. You're absolutely right with that. Absolutely right. Yeah, and so she is now, I don't know, maybe 40 years almost in, maybe not quite 30 some years at Home Shopping Network. And she's still there. She still makes appearances from time to time, but that is her connection. Also, Corbin Seitz, who has been
Yes.
in the television shopping world, wasn't she on Good Company at one point?
I think she was a guest host a few times, and then she did her own show at Channel 11 for a while. But yeah, she came in. I think, or no, she was the I think she was the fashion correspondent for Good Company for a while. Then she also guest hosted.
Okay. And then
Yeah,
she and Colleen wound up getting a show together over at Channel 11 at one point,
called Between Friends.
which I always thought worst. I mean, good enough idea on paper, but didn't they place that show directly opposite Good Company, which had killer ratings?
I think they thought they was plenty of room to take some, and it just what timing was not right
Yeah.
for that move.
When you look back on this era, and please go to Tom's website and his YouTube, and I'll tell you how to in a little while, and check out some of these old clips, because some stand the test of time, some are starting to look really dated. So it's really
Yeah.
interesting to look back at some of these clips. Continuing with the talk show segment for a moment, because Good Company was on in the afternoon. They had a morning show on, again, we're talking about Channel 5 in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that has been rebranded now in the afternoons using this kind of pay to get on format, isn't it?
Yeah, so Twin Cities Live was a morning talk show at Channel 5, and Gene Rump did it originally, and Bob Bruce did it for a few years. Eventually, again, similar to Good Company, it just fell victim of it became a show in the sea of a lot of other national shows. And I think in the last few months, last year, Twin Cities Live, first of all, a good show. It just became more of a community community relation show, because they bring local people on, which there was not a lot of room for that outside of cable access or whatnot. And it came, it reincarnated, and people, Twin Cities Live is very popular. I know a lot of people love it. And it's on, I think, 2 hours a day now. I think I could be wrong. It's just a different show,
Yeah.
and we're in a different era. And I'm not going to say it was better then. I'm not going to say it's because we're different. The competition's different. You have to be quicker. You need revenue. So, but yes, Twin Cities Live. I believe when they were conceptualizing it, it was going to be another Good Company. They took the title from the old show, same time, and the rest. I mean, that show's been on now almost probably 20 years now.
Wow. Wow.
Live, yeah. So it makes you think that how quick time goes.
The man responsible for the Good Company and Twin Cities Live success was the host, Steve Edelman, but he was also the executive producer. And after those shows he went on to produce some very successful national shows for HGTV.
Yeah, timing couldn't have been better for him because if you think about it, HTV was just getting started in the mid-90s. Steve was a very good producer. Everyone who worked with him would say he was very detailed, and he high expectation of work from others. They created a company, had a lot of shows on there. In fact, they had so many they were able to sell it their company for I think a good amount of money. But they did a lot, I think 10 plus years of programming for HGTV, which was perfect for what they knew how to do. And you'd see a lot of local people. I remember Joan Stephan was a Decorating Sense. She was on one of their shows. Timing was good. I remember when Good Company was canceled and, what are we going to do now? There was, the story, what will Steve and Sharon do? And sure enough, they found their niche. They did quite well of it.
Again, when you think of Minneapolis being a hotbed of television production, I mean, all these shows, very successful shows, were produced there. And it's so funny how just as I asked Tom to do this show, maybe about a month ago, since I asked him to do this and today, now the Jason show out of the Twin Cities is starting to get a national audience. It just went on in the afternoons in Austin. I guess it's on in Orlando. So here's a national stage for what started as a local show, correct?
Correct. And I think that it's, the stations are trying to find, what kind of programming can we put on, stations like Fox or even some of the other, mini corporations here, what can we put on? Everyone loves the Jason show too. I think there's a lot of heavy stuff going on right now in the world, a lot and nationally and politically. And I think people it's kind of like what the talk shows at night used to be. You'd escape the world. And I think a show like the Jason Show is they're just taking a whole different look at the world. They're not getting into. I'm not discounting that it's not a intelligent show, but it's not a heavy show that you have to
Right.
be in a. And I think people need that sometimes. And I think that's why Jason is successful at it. And obviously as a Gen Xer, he makes references I get and I laugh at. But his audience is always full. It's a very loyal fan base, and I think it's doing well in these other cities. So I think it's fantastic, and I think it's another good example of great talent coming from Minnesota. I have a theory, if you just for a moment on that, if you
Yeah,
want
please.
to. I mean, I think a lot of people go to Minneapolis, St. Paul, thinking this is going to be a stop between greater things in New York and Los Angeles. But if you think about it, we are the 22nd biggest, population wise, but we're far enough away from Chicago that we get a lot of people that want to go to say Chicago. They end up in Minneapolis and they realize, you know what, this is a really great place to live. We have a really educated population. We have very informed audiences, loyal audiences. I think people really realize what a great place it is, and I think that that's why there's been so many great local talent, and including I was mentioned before, comedians. Comedians have found Minneapolis a great place to start their career because it's not as cutthroat as New York or LA, and we have some legendary comedians that come from here, great comedy clubs that were here, some good TV avenues that people have been able to work through. So
I was actually going to take you down this very path, so I'm glad that you brought this up because I've always had this idea that there is a, using air quotes, Minnesota comedy. Does that make any sense when I say that, or am I the only person that understands what I mean?
no, it does, and I want to say it's not necessarily the Fargo, Coen Brothers movie humor. Okay, it's kind of like that, but not quite because I'm talking people, Louie Anderson, Joel from Hodgson from Mystery Science Theater, with Mystery Science Theater, which started here and became just a cult classic,
Yeah.
national treasure. It's having a clever sense of humor that your audience appreciates. And also Minnesotans aren't good at laugh. You know what? Our Scandinavian culture teaches not to laugh. Okay. So when you tell a joke and it works and the Scandinavians are laughing, then you've made it work. Or the German. So that's why I think it works here. I think that, and also that's why dry humor works so well from here.
Yeah.
It's not the in your face. I mean, it's not the in your face. Bleep out by words routines that work here. I think of we were talking a little bit offline about Let's Bowl,
Yeah.
Mr. Science Theater, even Garrison Keeler, to his credit, and these are humorists and comedians. Louie Anderson, who did a major talent for did a big Ghost Show the Guthrie, which was on HBO for years. It's you have to really work to get your laugh in Minnesota, but then you're able to go national. Then you're able to go onto the Tonight Show, and you're able to make a full audience laugh.
Yeah. You mentioned Louie Anderson. I know you developed and I'm the world's biggest fan, and I know you developed a good friendship with him later on in life. Tell me about him.
Oh, he's exactly what you saw on TV. I remember on the phone, Tommy, what's going on? I'm gonna be in town. We gotta get a pizza.
Oh,
Exactly what you'd see. And I mean, Louis was an observer of people, and I remember we were at this hotel lounge before he was gonna go on for his act, and people come up to him and talk to him, and then Louis was like, "Why don't we have any more butter here?" And it was, I, if people would just come and tell them their life story, and he'd listen to them and be nice, and that also comes. Minnesotans we're taught to be very humble, okay,
yeah.
and I think that's part of it, and and I think that just Louis' background made him a very humble person in general. But that's Louis, and I miss him,
Yeah.
and self-deprecation is survival, and boy, he knew how to make that into humor.
And he also had just I don't know, there was a genuineness to him. He was just one of those, if you saw him interviewed, you felt like that's sincere. It's not like he was the Jimmy Kimmel phony laugh at everything. It's just he was very, very, very sincere. Or not Jimmy, who's doing the Tonight Show these days? I get them all
Fallon.
mixed up. It is Jimmy Fallon. Okay. And again, you mentioned Garrison Keeler as well. Another one who just didn't his show just start local? How I don't even know how his show went national.
Oh, Garrison was, I think he was the morning guy at like NPR, and then developed this act, and eventually was doing it at the downtown St. Paul, and went national. He became a PBS National Public Radio star, backwards and frontwards, and I tell you what, I mean, he was printing not to get into the financial part, but he was printing money for
Oh,
those
sure.
public corporations for a long time,
Yeah.
and people loved Prairie Home Companion. They loved it. I mean, there's people who miss it, and it's still in a form right now. But again, it's a different kind of humor that you're not. You have to take your act a little bit higher, I think, than you would even as in the second city or some of the bigger cities. And I'm not um picking on these guys because I go to these places, and there's every city has their unique parts to it. We're not better than anyone else, but the Minnesota, us being here in the Midwest, and part of our background is you got to really work for that laugh. But when you get that laugh, boy, Minnesotans are loyal.
Yeah.
They are loyal, and they will. We were talking about like TV news and whatnot. You keep that channel the same station for the same news program because you watch Dave Moore for 20 years, or you listen to Prairie Home Companion every Sunday night because that's what you do.
Since you mentioned news, if anyone's interested in that topic, Tom was part of a 3-part documentary that the Twin Cities Public Television produced about the news battles that city fought for decades for ratings, and it's a fascinating thing if you're at all interested in the news industry, or especially the Twin Cities news media. Who, in your opinion, putting you on the spot, best anchor ever?
Best anchor ever. Okay, well I'm gonna go out of the box here a little bit on this. I'm gonna say Paul Majors, and I'm gonna tell you why. Okay, because Paul Majors, I think, created a brand for Channel 11 that no one had any expectations that Channel 11 was going to um, become this phenomenon that it was, and he had the right amount of humor. He was also a very smart guy, and I say was, he still is. He's because he's still with us. Lives at Palm Springs. I think that Paul Majors has a lot to do with the success Channel 11 still has today. And I think that a lot of that came from, I mean, he was truly the anchor of that program. Now, love Diana and Tom Ryder, Paul Douglas, and everyone else that worked there, but he was the star, and I think that the Tenga Corporation still owes him a lot for what he did for that station.
Yeah. You mentioned a name I skipped over, and I don't know, I can't believe I did this. Tom Ryder, because no discussion of Twin Cities Media would be complete if we didn't discuss him. I met him once at an event you put on celebrating bowling for dollars, and he could not have been a nicer person.
He just passed away a
Yeah.
few months ago. Yeah, no, and by the way, Tom, tell you, for everything Tom did in sports, you know what Tom really loved?
Hmm.
Bowling for dollars. He loved bowling for dollars, and that he told me that that show was so popular that they were doing the show 3 times a night, and I think he told me that he got a raise from like $10 a show to like $50 a show eventually. I know, crazy, huh?
Oh
But no,
my
that
gosh.
and his regret in life was that they convinced him that that show was discounting his credibility as a sports journalist, so he had to stop doing that. But oh, Tom loved bowling for dollars, and Tom will be the first to tell you he was a guy. He was a man of the people. I think Tom preferred bowling alleys to cocktail parties. So I think that the bowling for dollars crowd, that was his crowd. When Tom was selling his autobiography, a last couple of years of his life, before COVID, actually. I think it's the Hummel Shame Kid. It's on Amazon, and the best he was doing these in local bars, sports bars, and he was in his element. He was able to go to these bars. People remembered him there. He'd sign books, talking about some of the events he'd covered, but he always got those bowling for dollars questions. And the other question he got that unfortunately I can't help with is, I was in Bowling for Dollars. I can't remember the year, the date, but do you have the tape? No. There was hundreds of shows. We found, I think, three or four.
Oh,
I
ouch.
know it's again, no one saved anything. Um, I had to say, I posted some game shows to my channel. Not to veer too off topic, but I'll come back.
Yeah.
If I would have known, Sean, that these game shows were going to be so popular on my YouTube channel, I would have told myself, "Don't take news, tape Joker's Wild, and be an influencer on the internet." If I would have known that, I would have, Anyway,
No,
that's
I hear you. Yeah, I've posted a clip or two of the Gong Show, and it's amazing how many people do find those. Um, One name I got to bring up, and I don't even know if you know this connection, so this might be something new for you. Because I just found this out. Melissa Peterman, who's the actress on Reba's new show, and she's done some game shows, got her start on Let's Bowl. She was one of the models, if you will, of the cheap prizes on Let's Bowl. So there's another one.
well, her companion or also at least Bartholomew was a good friend of mine from high school. So
Really?
yeah, those of us that went to North St. Paul High School, we oftentimes, and again, this was a pre-digital age, so we're calling each other. You got to check out Lisa. She's on Let's Bowl, and Lisa was the star of all the musicals in high school,
Yes.
and we were very happy to see she was on Let's Bowl, and that was fantastic.
For those that are not familiar with this, again, it was a local show on, I think, 41 first, and it made the rounds of a couple others before finally going national on Comedy Central. And if you want to know more about that, we just discussed that on the previous podcast with Steve Siddall, so you can go and check that out. We're already running late here, and I had a feeling this might happen. Just a couple more questions, and then I'll let you go, because since I mentioned you have this incredible archive of Twin Cities Media. What is your holy grail? What's the one thing that you know has to be out there somewhere, someone's garage, some videotape somewhere, and you want to get your hands on it?
Oh, that is a tough question. That's a tough question because you know what, Sean, I keep finding stuff that I didn't know I wanted,
Yeah,
but
oh,
I'm
good
glad.
point. Okay.
You know something? How about this? The older video. someone out there had a big 3/4 inch quad machine, pneumatic machine out there that recorded a lot of stuff, and that's what I'm hoping to find. And let me answer your question second way. There's things I didn't think I wanted, but now I want them. Like for example, I want the entire KITN 29 bumper collection. I want every bumper they did with every song they did, and I used to not think much of it when it was on, and now, like a fine wine, it's aged on me to perfection. I want all of them.
What Tom's talking about is, for instance, they'd run a rerun of I Love Lucy, and then as the segment of the show would end before they would go to commercial, they'd play like 5 seconds of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds over a little cartoon animation. It was brilliant.
It was, and I didn't appreciate how brilliant it was until I couldn't find them. Because I think there was probably a part of time where I thought, nah, it's too modern for my website. Well, that was shorthanded thinking. And now I wish I had them all now. And I keep finding more videos to have them. And you know what? My site first started as a mostly a news site, a little bit of local commercials. Now I'm trying to embrace all localism of the Twin Cities market, a little bit of national stuff here and there. YouTube right now has been a good partner for it because it actually is able to. I have able to put more video into it. It's more dynamic. I love the comments. So forgive me, Shawn, if I can do a little bit. TC Media Now on YouTube. tcmedianow.com on the web. You can see recent finds. And if you don't mind, and Tom at tcmedianow.com is my email. You can also contact me on the website if you have tapes and they're locally based. You have some commercials, and everyone tells me I didn't tape the news. Well, wait a second. Did you tape a movie? Because if you did and you didn't stop, you probably taped the news, even replayed at 1 a.m.
And if you have 80s reruns of The Joker's Wild, he wants those as well because those
Absolutely.
get lots of views for some reason. So,
And Love Connection did too. When Chuck Woolery passed away, my Love Connection videos all of a sudden, and again, a show I probably would have not thought twice of when
yeah,
it was on. And now, why didn't I tape more?
yeah. In fact, I swear, final question. What is it about this fondness that people seem to have for video that is 50 years old in some case? Is it simpler time? Is it going back to your childhood? What is it?
I think both those, but also the things that are most popular are things you can't find in a DVD box set or streaming. So you can't I think if Love Connection right now, the entire library were on streaming, it wouldn't even people would not care too much about it. But watching Love Connection with the original commercials for every lawyer, for all the correspondence schools, for the 976 numbers that eventually came out. Okay, now that's fascinating. And I think that I really think that a lot of these antenna TV channels or things, look, if you really want to get some audience, find this stuff, put these commercials through it. That'll get some hits to people watching your programming. So I think that simpler times, even though I think sometimes we remember history a little bit more fun than it really was, but I think it's not something that you can just find out of the box, no pun intended.
Right. Tom, we're going to have to do this again. There's so much that we didn't cover. I really appreciate you so much for taking the time to discuss this.
Anytime, Shawn. Always happy to talk to you.
Well, I do hope that you will subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and leave a 5-star review. That's always appreciated because I don't want you to miss a show. And you can listen to the archive of past shows on any of the good podcasting apps, Spotify, Apple Music, any of those. Hope you'll check me out on social media by searching Shawn Wilsie, ShawnWilsie, on Instagram at SWilsie. Thank you for downloading this edition of Are We on the Air?
Yes, I know, Travis. That's why we give such bargains.
Copyright 2025, King Bobby Productions, all rights reserved.